So they are sewing these women up before they even reach the point where they have a period.
Correct. Well, or around that time, right? So it depends. And then what ends up happening is they can cut these kind of ropes when it's time to have sex, or tear it when you're having sex.
This is Sexy Funny Raw, where we chat all about the world of sex, from dating and relationships all the way to the adult industry itself. I'm Silvia Saige, and this is my Pornspective, answering all the questions you weren't even brave enough to ask Google. Get ready, because Sexy Funny Raw starts now.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Sexy Funny Raw. I'm, of course, your host, Silvia Saige, and joined in our new studio is Dr. Eddie, giving us his public health perspective. This episode, we are getting into something that is very important to talk about, because I don't think I even realized this was happening in the world, and it's happening to an astounding amount of women, and that is, it's hard to even say, folks, but genital mutilation. So, Dr. Eddie, kind of, I guess, fill us in on this, because I don't know a whole lot about it. I don't know where it's happening. I don't know how it's happening, and I don't know what is happening to these women. So let's dive into this, shall we?
Well, so female genital mutilation, which is currently what it's called via the World Health Organization and the CDC, used to be called female circumcision. There's female cutting. So all of these are variations thereof. As far as the World Health Organization is concerned, female genital mutilation has 4 different types. 3 of them are quite severe, 1 much less severe. So type 4 is much less severe. Those 4 different types, however, all have some sort of mutilation component on female genitalia.
Is this happening at birth? Is this happening?
So it's mostly happening as a rite of passage.
So around 13?
So it's going to depend, right? So it could be a little bit younger than that, or it could be a little bit older than that, and it's really going to depend on where we're talking about.
Okay.
And so this is, I don't know if common is the right word, but it certainly happens in a lot of regions in Central Africa.
Okay.
And parts of the Middle East as well.
Okay. Is it happening? So when you're saying like it's coming, like a coming of age, is this becoming like a virgin to not a virgin type of situation?
So this is to make sure that you are pure in a lot of instances, right? So it's
to make sure she hasn't had sex.
Correct.
First off.
Right. And so we're talking at about a pretty young age. In a lot of other countries, you often get married a lot younger and have sex a lot younger, and all of those kind of pieces to procreate a lot younger. And so depending on which type we're talking about, out of the 4 types, they can be pretty dramatic and really do mutilate the female genitalia. And it is happening, not just there, but the reason I think it matters for our audience that's here in the US that's probably asking, why on earth would I want to know about this, is because the US has a lot of people coming from all over the world. And so not knowing that it's happening can be really problematic when we don't know other people's potential experience. And there's also been instances, certainly in the past 10 or 15 years, where it's happened here in the US for people that felt culturally that it was necessary based on where they come from, right? And so people have lost their licenses. There's been a lot of laws put in place.
Because it was happening in hospitals?
Not in hospitals per se. We're not talking about mass amounts of people, but we're talking about like a dad brought in his 2 young girls because they immigrated to the US, and this is what you do naturally, and they wanted a physician to do it. They found a physician to do it. The physician did it because there were no laws in place for these things.
Interesting.
Now there's laws in place in 41 of the 50 states, but not all of them. And there's been instances where this has happened. What's also been on the flip side is there's recently been a couple of cases where it's happened in white Christian communities because sex equals sin and those kinds of components. And so these were white Caucasian women that had it done to them here in the US because of religion.
Okay, so when you say had this done to them, what exactly are we talking about they're having done?
So there's 4 different types. And so to make it simple, I'll say 1 removes the clitoris,
and
right?
What is I guess I just need to understand what they think the point in removing the clitoris
so that there is no pleasure in sex. And so sex is for procreation. And so getting rid of the clitoris removes that.
Okay.
Right? And people have been threatened by beyond mean, but complicated also, right?
Yeah.
Because these are cultural practices that have been consistent and happened over a long period of time. And then should we be placing our judgment on other types of cultures and stuff? I think we'll kind of wrap around back to that a little bit, but it becomes a problem when we're talking about removing the clitoris so that there's no, but that's not even the worst one. To be honest, I really don't think it's the first one. The second one is excision of the labia. And so there's a couple of things that can happen there.
Okay.
Where you're removing parts. I think it's not, I don't want to judge which one is worse because I think they're all pretty intense.
Yeah.
The third
I'd rather lose my lips than my clit. Let's just
what
be
I
honest
would say
there.
is that the third type I think is the most extreme.
Okay.
What that often happens is you could remove parts of the clitoris or the majora or minora, but also it gets sewn shut and allows only a small hole for urine and menstruation to come out, which creates a really serious amount of health problems.
Wow.
Because women menstruate for specific biological reasons, and the possibility for infection if you can't do things the way that the body intends, it's really, really bad on the body.
So they are sewing these women up before they even reach the point where they have a period.
Correct. Well, or around that time, right? So it depends. And then what ends up happening is they can cut these kind of ropes when it's time to have sex, or tear it when you're having sex.
And that's supposed to be like, that's how you know she's pure and perfect, as she's been tied up this entire time.
In a lot of instances, absolutely. And so to know that there's been an obsession with female purity throughout time, right? And certainly for the past 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And so this was, and I don't want to place like a history on it, but certainly a way of making sure that that purity is taking place.
Wow. So what would happen in that case? Because if she is sewn shut, she would not be able to menstruate properly. Couldn't that cause a lot of bacteria and bad things happening?
Absolutely. Tons of infections. The negatives the negatives for all of these realistically drastically outweigh.
So how is it still happening?
Because it's cultural, and we can argue that it's somewhere else in a lot of instances. There are a lot of movements against it. The World Health Organization has condemned it, but it continues to happen. The problem, I think, at least a little bit, is if you're living in a small town in a foreign country, let's take it foreign first, right? If you're living in a small town in a foreign country, and if you don't get it done, you can't find a partner because no one will marry you, and you don't have any other options in this small town in this country, somewhere far away, then not getting it could lead to death in a completely different way because you don't really have an option. And so it seems a little judgy, like my perspective, I think, and so that's where it becomes a little problematic. But should we be imposing our ideas and beliefs and morals on other places when this is what's going on and it has been going on there for a long time?
Yes, but I think there's a difference between being morals and then putting these people in health risk. I mean,
I don't disagree.
Yeah,
and certainly the World Health Organization and the CDC don't disagree. But socially, if you don't have an alternative, I think that at least has to be a part of the conversation, whether we agree with it or not.
So what would happen if you were to, say, sew this female shut and then she doesn't wed? She's just sewn together forever until she, I guess, cuts it or rips it on her own and just decides to be a
But she probably
spinster.
wouldn't do that. Right.
That is fascinating.
Pretty intense.
So I don't want to say that these are the same, but when we have obviously mentioned in the past episodes about circumcision.
Yeah.
So this is kind of along the same lines of it's a genital mutilation of some sort.
Definitely.
But I wouldn't say that the health ramifications are the same.
That was certainly one of the arguments for why they were a lot of places were discussing it as female circumcision, but female genital mutilation is like the current term. And so how we name things really matters too. And so female circumcision kind of equated it a little bit closer to male circumcision, which is also problematic in a variety of ways that we've discussed. But and it also doesn't give agency to young boys, and I could talk about that all day for sure. But for women, this is a different kind of thing. They're all body modifications, so they're all kind of in the same arena.
I guess another question I have too is because if we are taking away the female's clit, which that's in every one of these cases, is the clit is removed, correct?
Correct.
So no matter if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever level it is.
Well,
the
4
clit
doesn't include that. 4 is type 4. That's what we're talking about because there's 4 different types. Type 4, we're really talking about ceremonial or ritualistic kind of prick, or where it's not removing anything, it's not doing anything permanent, but it's symbolic. And so that also has its own.
That I can get behind.
I mean, if you have to do one of them, that would be the way to go. But it also, and it's something we haven't even brought up yet, is who's doing it, the cleanliness of how they're doing it, right? And so I don't want to suggest that people watch any of these things, but there are instances where instead of doing it in a sterile environment, people get lined up and are done on the floor, and it's done with glass, and it's not done, right? So it's really going to depend on where we're talking about in the world, right? Not every place, like it's not hospitals that are doing these things per se.
But I love knowing that information. But my question was going to be, if we're removing the clit because sex is meant to not be for enjoyment, that's the cause of this. Are men still having sex for enjoyment? Is sex for these people like you only have it when you're ready to have your 5th child? You know, like that's what I'm wondering, because it's not like these people aren't having sex on a regular basis, or are they not? I don't know. Is that?
I would probably say that that's a complex answer, only because a lot of these communities that would probably do this to the female body also equate the male body and the female body and pleasure in a different hierarchy, where it matters more for the men. And if the man wants to get off, he can do that, and he has ownership thereof of the female body. And so that's a complex one that we can't necessarily get into in a couple of minutes. But I would probably say that that's a piece and certainly a big thread in the kind of environments that would probably do this to the female form.
Yeah. Interesting. And I don't even know, I mean, I guess I've always had my clit, so I can't imagine not having it. But I still think at some point, I mean, the insertion, a penis in a vagina is still going to feel good because there's still senses on the inside. Is there ever mutilation that's happening internally to these women?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Because you don't want to damage anything that's going to
could make a child. Right. Okay.
And it still has to feel good for the penis.
Okay.
Probably.
Well, some of these I can't imagine feeling good for the penis if you're actually taking away some of the vulva.
Well, I mean, that scar tissue that happens as a result of it creates its own kind of environment. I'm not super clear on the specifics of how it works once it's been done.
Yeah.
Only that it happens and like the health repercussions thereof. Not so much the sexual engagement post, because I've never had that conversation with someone that's either had it done or that has sex in that environment.
Yeah. And exactly how prominent is this?
I mean, depending on what country we're talking about, it can be pretty common, depending on what country. Now, there's not a ton of countries that are doing it, but there are a few. And so that's very easy to find online. The World Health Organization has very detailed maps about the frequency and all of those things.
Is there any way for it to be undone, or?
It's going to depend on which type. So the clitoris, not really.
You'll never get that.
Right. You can cosmetically fix some of the things. And so that type of body modification does happen for sure. And so a lot of people that have started to advocate against female genital mutilation here in the U.S. are people that have experienced it and then come here and certainly spread the word about the repercussions and the negative effect it has on health and biology.
And would they ever do it on an infant, or is it
Not
only
to my
done?
knowledge.
Okay.
And so that's an interesting question. I haven't come across it being done on an infant. It's usually a little bit later in life. But there have been instances where it's done much younger than 9. But that's not the common approach. And so it's really going to depend. It's going to depend on what country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said they could, I mean, you obviously said it's not a regular thing, but sometimes they'll just line women up and.
Yeah. So there are a few documentaries on it.
Oh, really?
They don't show you the young girls per se, but they show you everything but.
Okay.
Right. And so it's really harrowing and impactful.
Yeah.
But it clearly shows that people are using sharp glass that's on the floor or things like that create their own problems aside from the severity of the mutilation. Like there's all of these other things that we're introducing that are bad as well in a lot of cases. That's not the majority from my understanding, but it certainly does happen.
Are women dying from this?
Women are dying from a variety of different types of infections.
Dying pretty right away after this happens?
No, not right away.
So it's not a bleeding out type of situation. It's more of like longer along the road problems.
Infection, impacted, can't walk down the road. Yeah. But there is a lot of information out there. And so I think it's important that everybody maybe do a little bit of research if you're interested in knowing more. The World Health Organization has really interesting maps. It's probably should be your first stop. And then from there, they'll kind of send you in a bunch of different directions a lot of the time. The CDC also has some information on it since it is happening to a very limited degree here in the U.S. But there's also a lot of states that don't have any laws against it at all.
Really?
Yeah, there's laws in 41 states now.
Okay.
But that's a relatively recent development. A lot of the developments here in the U.S. have been very recent.
Is that mainly because we didn't really know what was going on?
Correct.
Or? Yeah.
And so we often don't think about when we're talking about the health of everybody in Illinois. We're not talking about like what is the health specific needs of people that have just come to Illinois from whatever part of the world, right? We don't often view it in that lens. Only when someone starts to advocate for it and say, hey, we should have some laws against it. And as a result, since it's been happening a little bit, and it's not just immigrants somewhere far away, now it's happening in like Christian communities because sex equals sin, right? That becomes scary and dangerous. And so having laws in it kind of can protect us from that kind of stuff.
Outside of like infections, what are the long-term problems that will arise?
Well, I mean, aside from the mental health trauma
of course.
or the never being able, so there would be no sexual health, period. And I know that we're so focused on healthy sexual health. There would be very limited sexual health because sexual health in this regard would only be for procreation. So
interesting.
Not orgasming. Orgasming are really good for us. We should do it all the time.
Wait. Okay. I guess I just, in my brain, never even thought that this woman wouldn't have an orgasm ever.
Not without a clitoris.
I am like I don't know, I don't have words for that because I guess I'm still thinking she could still have an orgasm internally.
I mean, that's certainly a possibility, but that's not the majority of orgasms that happen in the world.
Well, that's
right?
the truth.
Yeah.
That is definitely
and so
true.
I know that some women have said that they can have an orgasm without any clitoral stimulation.
Yeah.
I guess I would follow that up with.
It would be much harder and wow.
And so I don't know the specifics of even if masturbation ever becomes a part of your life again.
Yeah.
That I don't know.
Interesting.
That I don't know for sure. I know that there are lots of women.
I would love to talk to a survivor, honestly.
There are quite a few that have started advocacy groups that have helped us change our laws on these things. And so if it wasn't for them speaking out about their experiences, it wouldn't be in our laws.
Yeah.
And so I know that there's lots of lectures and talks that they've done that you can certainly look up and watch and see what they say. I haven't necessarily looked at all of them to see exactly, and they probably wouldn't get into. I'm not masturbating anymore or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I advocate that masturbation, right?
Yeah.
And so I think masturbation is good for everybody.
Yeah.
And so-
Absolutely, it is. It releases all sorts of endorphins and
Definitely.
a great sleep aid, and yeah.
Lots of things.
Yeah.
For sure.
So very interesting. So what about when these women who have had this genital mutilation, what happens when they now become mothers themselves and are going to give a vaginal birth? Are they capable of a vaginal birth?
So giving birth, by the time that you've been pregnant and all that stuff, you've already had intercourse, so it's been kind of reopened.
Okay.
And it could work past that scar tissue.
Okay.
So it doesn't necessarily impact it that much. But when we're talking about who's doing it to who, in a lot of instances, it's the women that then do this to their daughters, because that's what they had done and that's what is the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't get it done, then will you be able to marry, and will you be able to build a family, and all of those like cultural important things?
Yeah.
Because do you have an option if you don't do it?
Right.
In a lot of these cases. And so the women kind of perpetuate this behavior because that's what they had done, and they survived, and they had a family, and they had a happy life.
Yeah.
And so without doing it, do you have that option?
I guess I'm just wondering, I'm going back to the childbirth and with getting through all that scar tissue, because naturally a woman's vagina at childbirth would just naturally dilate and naturally expand to let the baby's head come forward. But if her outside is all scar tissue, I don't imagine it spreading naturally and opening. I know sometimes women have episiotomies to cut down to the butthole, but is that what's going to happen here? Is there going to have
It's probably depending
cut?
on the severity of the scar tissue, so it's going to depend.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know specifically, but that would absolutely make sense.
Yeah.
Only because that scar tissue is not going to be as flexible and
Right.
and all of those things.
Wow.
And so making sure that the body is ready for the baby to come out, if that's the only reason that you're having sex in the first place,
Right.
then you're going to make sure that that's in place.
Wow. That, I mean, it's devastating. It's interesting. I'm definitely glad we talked about it, and I'm glad we brought some attention to it. I hope that it gets taken care of. I don't even know what words to use.
I think it's important to know that it's happening.
Yeah.
And to know that it exists, because everybody's experiences, and we meet people all the time that we don't know
Of course.
what's happened to them or what's going on. And when we're traveling, we don't know those like cultural things that are going on. And so I think it's important for us to be a little bit of aware.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Well, I thank you so much for bringing awareness to this and, you know, letting me in on a little bit of knowledge, because I certainly had no idea so much of this was going on. So I appreciate you. Thank you for your time. If you guys liked what you saw here today, or if you have any more questions or even topics that you would like us to discuss, go ahead and comment below. We would love to get back to them, and hit that subscribe button, guys. And we'll see you next time. Adios.